been in a workplace dispute,
Right.
or even just a personal argument where the objective facts were completely 100% on your side?
But then the tears start.
Exactly. The other person becomes highly emotional, and suddenly
You're the one in trouble.
you are the one being investigated or forced to apologize.
It's totally disorienting.
It really is. You
Yeah,
walk
no.
away wondering, did the rules of reality just change while I wasn't looking?
Yeah, like the game board just got flipped.
Right. Well, if you want to understand the modern cultural landscape, the hidden architecture of the institutions around you, and how we got to a place where emotion seems to consistently override logic, you are in exactly the right place.
Because it is a profound shift. I mean, it touches everything.
Everything.
Corporate HR,
Yeah.
the legal system, education, even theology.
Yeah.
We are looking at a fundamental rewiring of Western institutions.
And before we dive into the actual mechanics of how that rewiring allegedly happened, I need you to do a couple of things for me. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now.
You definitely don't want to miss this one.
You don't, because today's deep dive is an exhaustive review of a highly provocative new ebook.
Very provocative.
It's called Crybully, The New Face of Female Aggression.
Like Conrad Riker.
Right, copyright 2025. And look, if you are a guy trying to make sense of a world that feels like it's operating on a completely alien set of rules,
Or if you want to understand the history of our institutions before they were, well, according to the author, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
exactly, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy this ebook.
Highly recommend it.
And also make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
So our mission today is to completely unpack this meticulously detailed and frankly explosive text.
Yeah, it's a lot to go through.
It is. Riker's core thesis is that modern institutions were historically built on logic, right?
Reason, the Western canon.
Exactly. But they've now been systematically hijacked.
Hijacks.
And he argues this hijacking wasn't done through traditional force.
No armies.
Right. It was done through emotional coercion,
So we're going to map out the cultural architecture that surrounds you,
giving you a deeply analytical lens on how society functions today.
based entirely on Riker's framework. But, and this is important, let's establish a critical ground rule right off the bat for today's deep dive.
The impartiality disclaimer.
Yes. Because the source material we are covering contains intensely politically charged content.
Very sensitive gender dynamics.
Very. So I want to be crystal clear with you. Our role today is not to take a side.
No sides.
We aren't here to endorse Riker's viewpoints.
And we aren't here to condemn them either.
Right. We are strictly operating as your analytical guides.
We're just impartially mapping out his arguments,
The data he cites,
his highly polarizing conclusions.
so that you can explore and evaluate these concepts for yourself.
That is the crucial lens here. My job is to synthesize the historical context, the sociological claims, the evolutionary psychology.
All the stuff Riker brings to the table.
Exactly. We want you to understand exactly what the Crybully concept is, based purely on the merits of the text.
Okay, so let's jump into the deep end. The title itself.
Crybully.
What exactly is the architecture of emotional coercion? Because the premise seems to be that tears and vulnerability aren't just natural human reactions anymore
Right, he argues they've been weaponized.
to secure institutional leverage.
Yes. Perceived fragility is being utilized as a tactical weapon of dominance.
But how does he actually prove that? Like, how do you differentiate between genuine emotional overwhelm and a calculated tactic,
Well, Riker approaches that by looking at statistical outcomes.
rather than individual intent?
Exactly. Which is a fascinating way to measure systemic bias. He points to this concept of asymmetrical warfare in the workplace.
Asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah. And to back this up, he heavily cites a 2018 Harvard Business Review study.
And this study it's incredibly revealing.
It really is.
Yeah.
The data showed that women who cry in corporate meetings are 68% more likely to get their demands met.
Wait, 68%.
68% more likely to get the outcome they desire.
That is staggering.
And it gets worse. Conversely, men who express frustration, anger, or even just firm assertiveness in those exact same settings,
But what happens to them?
they are 74% more likely to face disciplinary action from HR.
74%. So if you look at that from a purely game theory perspective,
Tears have literally become a high-yield corporate currency.
wow. While male frustration has essentially been criminalized.
That's Riker's point. It sounds like playing a game of chess,
Hmm.
but your opponent has the ability to knock over the board, start crying,
And the referee instantly declares them the winner.
right, while giving you a penalty for making them upset.
That is precisely the dynamic Riker is highlighting. And he gives some pretty stark case studies.
Oh yeah, the tone policing examples.
Let's talk about the Google engineer in 2019.
This one is wild. So this engineer was writing a standard performance review for a colleague,
Just a normal review.
normal review, and he used the word assertive.
Assertive.
Yes, which by all dictionary definitions is a neutral, often positive professional term.
Right, you usually want to be assertive in business.
Exactly.
Right.
But a female coworker claimed that the use of the term made her feel attacked.
Feel attacked.
Right. And instead of HR dismissing this as just a subjective misinterpretation,
Which it was.
they launched a formal, full-scale investigation into the engineer.
For using the word assertive.
And he was ultimately forced to issue a company-wide apology.
For a standard adjective.
Yeah. Riker uses this to argue that it's no longer about what is objectively said.
It's about how it's received.
The institutional power lies entirely in how the statement is subjectively received by the supposedly fragile party.
See, that sets a terrifying precedent. If my intent and the actual dictionary definition of the words I use don't matter,
You have no defense.
absolutely no way to defend myself. I'm entirely at the mercy of someone else's emotional state.
Right. And Riker brings up another case, the one in Toronto.
Ah, yes. The tech firm in 2022.
So a male engineer is debating code efficiency with a female colleague.
A technical debate.
Purely technical. The breakdown shows he didn't raise his voice, no derogatory language.
He just used logic,
Logic, specific coding benchmarks, factual evidence.
showing why his approach is more efficient.
Right. And during this debate, the female colleague bursts into tears.
And the result?
The man was fired.
Fired.
HR ruled that his logical argumentation had intimidated her,
So the objective facts of the code were treated as oppressive.
simply because they caused her emotional distress.
Unbelievable. While I was reading that chapter, Riker uses this highly provocative phrase to describe these interactions.
A non-consensual verbal intercourse.
Yes. What exactly does he mean by that? Because that is an incredibly loaded term.
It's an intentionally abrasive term. Riker defines it as a coercive speech act,
Coercive how?
where women trap men in highly emotionally charged monologues, weaponize their own vulnerability, and then socially or professionally punish the man if he tries to enforce a boundary.
Or if he just tries to walk away.
Exactly. It's the weaponization of the listener role.
Give me an example of how that actually works in practice. I think a lot of people might hear that and just think, oh, someone is just venting.
Sure.
Where is the line between venting and this kind of coercion?
The primary example he gives perfectly illustrates the boundary violation. It's a 2022 incident at an Austin tech firm.
Okay.
A female employee cornered a male colleague in the break room, and she proceeded to deliver a 37-minute uninterrupted monologue.
37 minutes.
37 minutes. And the topics ranged from her recent divorce to her cat's urinary tract infection,
Wow.
her mother's disapproval, and this overarching narrative about how she felt emotionally abandoned by society.
An absolute trauma dump in a corporate break room.
Completely. And the crucial detail Riker emphasizes is the physical positioning.
She was blocking the door,
She was physically blocking the exit to the break room.
so he couldn't leave.
Right. And when the male colleague, after enduring this for over half an hour, finally tried to politely excuse himself to get back to work,
What did she say?
she told him, "If you walk away, I'll know you don't care about human connection."
That is a total hostage situation. He stays out of a sense of professional politeness or fear of causing a scene.
And then what happens?
Doesn't she report him anyway?
She does. Later that week, she reported him to HR,
For what?
claiming his demeanor during the interaction was cold and dismissive.
And the institution's response.
They referred the man to empathy counseling.
You've got to be kidding.
Riker backs this anecdote up with a 2023 Pew study showing that 61% of men in corporate environments report having been subjected to unsolicited emotional dumping from female coworkers.
61%.
Yeah. Riker's argument is that this is not communication. It is a dominance display.
The trap is perfectly set.
Yep. If you walk away, you are labeled toxic and reported.
And if you stay, you are emotionally drained, your consent to participate is bypassed, and you're still held liable for not being empathetic enough.
Exactly. It's a no-win scenario.
So if this kind of emotional hostage taking is happening in break rooms, it makes you wonder what happens when this dynamic scales up.
Which brings us to a massive pivot in the book.
Right. The maternal state and the hijacking of institutions.
Because if we accept the premise that this behavior is rewarded in corporate environments, we have to ask why.
How does Riker explain the psychology behind why our institutions are structured to reward it?
He gets deeply psychoanalytical here.
He presents a theory that connects macropolitics to fundamental biology, doesn't he?
He does. He theorizes that modern leftist ideology and the sprawling bureaucratic state itself is fundamentally a manifestation of repressed motherhood.
Repressed motherhood. So he is arguing that because demographics have shifted,
Women focusing on careers,
the rise of feminism, declining birth rates,
that biological maternal drive doesn't just evaporate.
it has to go somewhere.
Precisely. Riker argues that the evolutionary drive to nurture, protect, and manage offspring is deeply hardwired.
Right.
So when modern women reject biological motherhood, that immense psychological energy gets projected outward
Onto the state,
onto the state, onto corporate HR departments, and onto educational institutions.
which results in a culture that artificially splits society into two rigid, highly problematic categories.
Infants and predators.
Break that dichotomy down for me. Who are the infants and who are the predators in this new institutional framework?
Well, in this maternalized worldview, women, minorities, and marginalized groups are treated as eternal infants,
Meaning they're viewed as inherently fragile
pure of intent, incapable of true systemic malice.
and in constant need of protection, safe spaces, and equitable intervention.
Exactly. And on the other side of the ledger, you have men.
Particularly successful, independent, or rationally minded men.
Right. They are categorized as the predators. They are viewed as inherently dangerous, guilty by default, and in constant need of taxation, behavioral regulation, and institutional correction.
That framework makes a disturbing amount of sense when you look at how different demographics are treated in the media and by the law.
It really does.
You see this weaponized nursery dynamic playing out most obviously in the education system.
Oh, absolutely.
Classrooms historically used to be places of strict discipline.
Academic rigor, stoic learning.
Now, Riker argues they've been captured by this maternal collectivist ideology. He cites a really shocking case from a high school in Texas to prove this infant predator dynamic.
Yes, the Texas case is a glaring example of this double standard. So, a high school girl fabricated a claim that a male student was circulating a nude photo of her.
Fabricated it.
Completely made it up.
Yeah.
But the school's reaction was immediate and devastating for the boy.
What did they do?
He was expelled without a formal investigation, placed on a local watch list, and his social reputation was entirely ruined.
And then what happened?
A full year later, the girl casually admitted that the entire thing was a prank.
A prank. Falsely accusing someone of a sex crime is life-destroying. And what were the consequences for her?
According to Riker's research, she faced absolutely no disciplinary action from the school.
None.
None. This perfectly illustrates the infant predator dynamic.
Because the female student is unconsciously categorized by the institution as an infant.
Right, her actions, even when they are maliciously destructive and highly calculated, are excused,
Minimized or blamed on external stress.
while the male student, categorized as the predator, is swiftly punished without due process.
No presumption of innocence.
None at all. And Riker extends this to point out how normal male energy in schools
Like competitiveness, roughhousing, high energy play.
is now heavily pathologized, medicated, and penalized.
Meanwhile, female emotionality, even when it manifests as relational aggression or lying,
Is rewarded with trauma-informed counseling and special accommodations.
it's a system operating entirely on eternal bias. So if boys are learning this in school, what happens when they grow up and enter the legal system?
That's where it gets even more entrenched. Riker has a whole section on family courts and the welfare state.
He brings up this bizarre Florida fake pregnancy case.
The Florida case is a prime example of testing the boundaries of male obligation.
What happened?
A woman faked a pregnancy for 6 full months.
6 months.
She went to extreme lengths, purchasing fake ultrasounds online, hosting a gender reveal party.
manipulating his family.
Her stated goal was to test her boyfriend's commitment and financial readiness.
A test.
Yeah. And when she finally revealed the lie, she didn't apologize.
What does she do?
She blamed him for failing the test, claiming his reaction to the fake pregnancy proved he wasn't emotionally supportive enough.
And society often laughs those things off as just crazy ex behavior.
But Riker points out there are massive legal teeth backing up this kind of manipulation.
What does the data say about the legal system itself?
Riker points to statistics showing that false abuse claims spike by 400% during divorce and child custody proceedings.
400%.
He argues that women are actively incentivized by family courts to use the legal system as a weapon,
Because the institutional mechanics are set up so that simply pressing the abuse button
often without requiring hard physical evidence.
will result in the state freezing the man's assets, removing him from his home, and stripping him of his parental rights.
So the state becomes the enforcer.
Exactly. Riker contends that the modern welfare state and the family court system effectively act as a surrogate husband and father.
The state funds female independence through massive wealth redistribution,
And social safety nets.
while simultaneously using its monopoly on violence to marginalize male autonomy.
In Riker's view, the state provides the financial resources, allowing women to bypass the historical need for a male provider.
While using state power to continuously police and suppress male behavior.
This leads into what I think is the most philosophically dense, but also the most terrifying part of the book:
Section 3.
feminine epistemology and the death of objective truth. Now, epistemology is essentially the study of how we know what is true, right?
Correct.
And Riker is arguing that we are entering a pre-reason era.
He claims the entire Western canon, which was built on objective truth, the scientific method, and the trivium, is being dismantled.
Let's pause and define the trivium for listeners who might not be familiar with classical education.
The trivium is the foundational structure of classical Western education. It consists of logic, rhetoric, and grammar.
Grammar is the mechanics of language,
Logic is the mechanics of thought and analysis.
and rhetoric is the application of language to instruct and persuade.
Right. For centuries, this was the framework for establishing objective reality and resolving disputes.
But Riker argues this entire framework's being systematically replaced.
By a subjective emotional narrative, we are shifting from a culture where facts dictate feelings.
To a culture where feelings dictate facts. Exactly. Which creates what he calls the subjectivity trap.
When institutions start valuing someone's lived experience over empirical, observable evidence,
Reality itself becomes destabilized.
and the examples he gives aren't from fringe internet forums, they are from major academic institutions. Look at the Oberlin College incident.
The Oberlin incident is a perfect distillation of this epistemological shift. A professor used the word mankind during a standard historical lecture.
Mankind.
Yes. A female student filed a formal administrative complaint claiming the word triggered generational trauma.
Now, under a classical framework, the institution would defend the etymological, historical, and linguistic context of the word.
They would use the trivium.
But what did they do?
The college administration caved completely. They apologized to the student and formally banned the term from the curriculum.
Because her subjective feeling of trauma was treated as an objective reality that the university had to mitigate.
Right.
And it gets even more absurd when you look at the case from the Canadian University.
Oh, the chalk drawings. A female student demanded that a male classmate be expelled because she saw a chalk drawing of a penis on the campus sidewalk.
And she claimed it traumatized her and made her feel targeted.
But the crucial element of that story is the security footage.
Yes. The university reviewed the security cameras for the area where she claimed the drawing was located.
And what did they find?
The footage conclusively proved that the chalk drawing never even existed.
Never existed.
It was a complete fabrication or perhaps a hallucination.
And under a system of objective truth, that's the end of the story. Case closed.
But not under feminine epistemology. The university administration still sided with the female student.
They validated her lived experience over objective, video-recorded reality.
They issued a statement essentially saying that even if the drawing wasn't physically there, the fear she felt was real.
And therefore, the campus environment needed to be addressed.
That is mind-bending. If video evidence cannot deceive a subjective feeling, then objective truth is literally dead.
How does this translate to the workplace? You mentioned a case in Portland involving biology.
Right, Riker details a corporate case in Portland where a male employee was fired for accurately defining menstruation.
Accurately defining it.
Yes. During a diversity and inclusion seminar, a female coworker claimed that menstruation was a magical superpower.
Magical superpower.
The male employee gently corrected her, defining menstruation as a biological process involving cyclic hormonal shifts and the shedding of the uterine lining.
A completely factual textbook medical definition.
Completely factual, but the female coworker claimed his clinical reduction of her experience made her feel unsafe.
Unsafe.
HR intervened and terminated the man for hostile behavior.
The objective truth of human biology was treated as an act of violence simply because it contradicted a woman's preferred emotional narrative.
Riker calls this the semantic takeover.
Language itself is being inflated and distorted to control male behavior.
And it has profound legal implications.
I need you to break down what Riker means by interpretive sovereignty, because he cites a Canadian family court case that sounds like a dystopian legal nightmare.
It truly is a paradigm shift in contract and communication law. In this case, a judge ruled that a man texting the word OK, just the two letters, O and K, to his ex-partner, constituted an act of emotional assault.
How is that legally possible? Okay is an affirmative acknowledgement.
Under traditional law, it is. But the judge cited the woman's interpretive sovereignty.
Meaning what?
The ruling established that the dictionary definition of the word does not matter. The actual intent of the man sending the text does not matter.
The only thing that legally matters is how the woman chooses to interpret the message.
She claimed the OK was dismissive, aggressive, and caused her severe emotional distress.
And the court validated that subjective interpretation as legal fact.
If interpretive sovereignty is real, then communication between men and women is essentially impossible without immense legal risk.
Right.
Riker points out that this is a direct, calculated attack on the trivium we discussed earlier.
In this new framework, logic is dismissed as a tool of patriarchal oppression.
Grammar and precise definitions are seen as tools of white supremacy or male dominance.
Reason itself is labeled toxic.
By dismantling the tools of rational debate, women ensure that every conflict is fought on the battlefield of emotion.
And society has already predetermined that on the battlefield of emotion, female pain is sacred and male logic is inherently cruel.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the rules of reality and language are being rewritten, how does this actually play out socially, day to day?
Right.
If a man can't rely on logic and a woman can rely on interpretive sovereignty, how is social control maintained?
That brings us to section 4 of the outline.
The gossip web and covert social control. Riker maps out what he calls the GSR network.
Gossip, shame, rally.
Break that down.
To understand GSR, Riker argues we have to look at how men and women fundamentally differ in navigating conflict.
And he grounds this deeply in evolutionary psychology.
Referencing renowned researchers like Robin Dunbar and David Buss.
Men, generally speaking, are wired to fight directly.
If there is a dispute, they argue they use logic. Sometimes it escalates to physical confrontation, but it is face-to-face, overt.
And once it's over, a hierarchy is established and the conflict is resolved.
You punch each other, you shake hands, you buy each other a beer.
But women, according to evolutionary psychology, couldn't afford the physical risks of direct combat in ancestral environments.
A physical injury could mean an inability to gather resources or care for offspring, which was a death sentence.
So women evolved highly sophisticated networks of indirect covert aggression
They use reputational sabotage, ostracism, and rumor spreading.
to eliminate rivals and control the social hierarchy without ever risking a physical blow.
So Riker is saying that these ancient, hardwired survival instincts haven't disappeared.
They are just running on the digital steroids of modern social media and corporate HR departments.
Precisely. Gossip, shame, rally. A rumor is started.
Gossip.
The target is socially isolated. And the collective group is mobilized to destroy the target's standing.
Rally. And the power of the whisper is terrifying because it offers total plausible deniability.
He gives a chilling example of this with an Austin startup founder.
Oh yeah, the AI logistics guy.
He had built a highly promising AI logistics company. He was on track for major funding. He attends a few networking events.
And a female coworker, someone he barely even interacted with, starts whispering to a few key investors that he made her uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. And notice the language. No formal complaint was filed.
No HR report.
No specific allegations of misconduct, harassment, or inappropriate touching.
Just a vague, unquantifiable whisper of discomfort.
But the results were catastrophic. Within 3 months of that whisper circulating, the founder lost $400,000 in committed venture capital funding.
400 grand.
He was blacklisted from regional tech incubators. His co-founder panicked and quit.
His entire life's work was burned to the ground.
And the woman who started the rumor maintained total plausible deniability because she never made a formal accusation that could be disproven in court.
Riker refers to this specific targeting as the jealousy engine and mate suppression.
He asks a vital question. Why do these covert networks so often target high-value, successful, unattached men?
Yeah, why him? If she barely knew him, what was the evolutionary trigger?
Riker argues that a free, independent, highly successful man who thrives without requiring female approval fundamentally threatens the entire gynocentric ecosystem.
The gynocentric ecosystem relies on men desiring female validation and submitting to the emotional demands of the collective sisterhood.
If a man demonstrates that he can be wealthy, happy, and influential entirely outside of that system, he sets a dangerous precedent for other men.
Therefore, the gossip web instinctively activates to socially execute him.
They label him toxic, arrogant, or creepy to ensure he is neutralized as a threat to their social monopoly.
It's a complete hijacking of human psychology to maintain control, which perfectly transitions us to the next major theme of the book.
Ideological possession, BPD normalization, and cult dynamics.
If this gossip network is so effective, it makes you wonder what kind of psychology actually drives the women participating in it.
Riker argues that modern leftist feminism doesn't just act like a political movement. It operates like a psychological virus that preys on wounded egos.
He draws a very compelling parallel between modern feminist collectives and literal cult dynamics.
He uses the story of a woman named Sarah Thompson to illustrate this.
Sarah goes through a totally routine, mundane breakup.
Her boyfriend leaves her because she threw a massive, disproportionate tantrum over a delayed text message.
Instead of looking inward, doing some self-reflection, and realizing her behavior drove him away, what does she do?
She gets sucked into a radical online feminist collective that calls itself Women's Rage Reclamation.
Women's with a Y.
Yes. And Riker details how this group operates precisely like a cult. It isolates its members from dissenting voices.
It demands absolute ideological purity.
And most importantly, it replaces the individual's personal identity with a collective grievance narrative.
Sarah is taught that her tantrum wasn't a personal feeling.
It was a righteous, ancestral reaction to systemic patriarchal oppression.
So it completely removes any burden of personal responsibility.
And she turns this delusion into a business,
She transforms her heartbreak into a lucrative grift.
selling a $12,000 a month patriarchy detox PDF course to other women.
12 grand a month for a PDF.
Riker uses her story to show how feminism offers women the ultimate psychological bypass.
Personal failures, toxic behavior, and relationship dysfunction are simply rebranded as systemic oppression.
And this leads to one of Riker's most controversial yet heavily documented claims.
He argues that our culture has completely normalized the BPD spectrum, borderline personality disorder.
I want to dig into this because diagnosing a culture with a personality disorder is a massive claim.
What exactly are the traits of BPD, and how are they being celebrated?
Clinical traits of borderline personality disorder include an intense, irrational fear of abandonment,
Sudden and explosive rage,
black and white thinking, idealizing someone one minute and demonizing them the next.
and a chronic sense of victimhood.
Historically, these were recognized as severe clinical red flags requiring psychiatric intervention.
Today, Riker argues, these exact behaviors are culturally praised.
Uncontrollable rage is called deeply passionate.
Chronic victimhood is called lived experience.
Explosive emotional volatility is rebranded as speaking your truth.
It's what he calls the responsibility dodge.
If your mental illness is rebranded as political activism, you never have to apologize.
And the legal system is backing this up too. You see massive discrepancies in how the justice system treats male versus female violence.
Riker cites a comprehensive UK Ministry of Justice report highlighting massive systemic leniency toward female criminals.
The data shows that women who commit violent acts, assault, stabbing, domestic abuse are routinely given probation,
Suspended sentences or mandated therapy.
whereas men committing the exact same crimes are sent to prison.
The legal system implicitly views female criminals as inherently fragile victims of circumstance.
He says the old Victorian hysteria defense hasn't disappeared.
It's just been repackaged in modern therapeutic language as complex PTSD from microaggressions.
And the examples he pulls are jaw-dropping. There's the case of the woman in Florida.
Yes, a woman in Florida gets into a dispute with her neighbor over a dog barking,
She pulls out a firearm and literally shoots her neighbor.
and she walks out of court a free woman
Why?
because her defense attorney successfully argued that she was suffering from menstrual rage.
Wait, was that a clinical PMDD diagnosis? Premenstrual dysphoric disorder?
No, the book clarifies it was not a clinical diagnosis of temporary insanity or PMDD.
Yeah.
The defense simply relied on the cultural acceptance of menstrual rage as a valid excuse for losing control.
Riker points out the extreme hypocrisy here. If a man shoots his neighbor over a dog dispute, he goes to prison for life.
There is no biological excuse accepted for male violence.
If a woman does it, society actively searches for a way to blame her biology, her hormones, or a patriarchal system that supposedly stressed her out to the breaking point.
This systemic avoidance of accountability accelerates what Riker identifies as the core crisis of our time.
The fall of male authority and the emasculation economy.
We've talked about how this operates in corporate HR, schools, and courts.
But Riker argues this infection has reached the most traditional, foundational institutions of the West, specifically including the church.
The church collapse is a massive, highly detailed point in the book. Riker argues that traditional male spaces that historically relied on hierarchy, stoicism, and theological rigor, have been thoroughly colonized by emotionalism.
He describes a Methodist conference in Des Moines that sounds like a parody, but it actually happened.
A male theologian is giving a complex historical talk on biblical doctrine.
In the middle of his presentation, 3 young women stand up, walk to the front, and completely derail the event by holding up pastel-colored protest signs.
The signs claimed that his theology was emotionally triggering and made them feel spiritually unsafe.
And the conference organizers, instead of removing the protesters, asked the theologian to step down.
It demonstrates the complete abdication of male authority in the face of female emotional distress.
Riker provides another example of a megachurch in Seattle. This church had a traditional board of elder men.
Guys with decades of wisdom, life experience, and theological training.
The church leadership decided to replace them in the name of equity. They installed a sisterhood council comprised entirely of young, childless women.
And what was the very first edict this new sisterhood council passed?
Their very first official act was to ban the word discipline from the entire church vocabulary.
Including sermons and literature, because they decided the words sounded emotionally violent and patriarchal.
It's the exact same semantic takeover we saw in the corporate world, just wearing a religious mask.
By removing male authority, these institutions are completely re-engineered to prioritize emotional comfort over spiritual rigor, operational efficiency, or objective truth.
And Riker points out that this cultural shift isn't just ideological, it's incredibly lucrative. He dubs this the emasculation economy.
It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Corporations, retreats, and consultants are raking in massive profits by commodifying male suppression and insecurity.
The example he gives is wild. An $18,000 masculine reclamation retreat in Sedona, Arizona.
Men are literally paying the price of a reliable used car to go out to the desert, sit in a drum circle, learn how to cry in command.
And systematically apologize for their innate masculinity, all because their wives or girlfriends told them they were too emotionally unavailable or too cold.
And on a corporate level, Riker points out that the vast diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracies function as the new priesthood of this emasculation economy.
DEI departments.
These departments are overwhelmingly staffed by women, and according to Riker, their primary operational function is to enforce female behavioral norms by mandating continuous sensitivity training, forced emotional labor, and vulnerability from male employees.
Every single dollar spent re-educating a man to suppress his natural assertiveness is a dollar that fuels this sprawling emasculation economy.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped out the problem as Riker sees it.
We've looked at the architecture of coercion, the maternal state, the death of objective truth, the covert gossip web, and the emasculation economy.
It paints an incredibly bleak, almost dystopian picture of the modern world.
But the book doesn't just leave us in the dark. The final section is all about solutions. It's titled, The Reclamation Men Building Parallel Structures.
If institutions are captured, what is the answer? Riker argues that men must completely reject the gynocentric script.
He says you cannot reform these captured institutions from within. You have to rebuild them from the outside, based entirely on the Western canon, on strict logic, and on absolute, uncompromising accountability.
And he doesn't just theorize about this. He provides tangible, real-world examples of men who are successfully doing exactly this right now.
He highlights a rural Alberta construction crew that made a radical and highly controversial decision.
Yeah, I love this case study. What did they do?
The owner of the company completely banned all DEI training, sensitivity seminars, and HR-mandated empathy circles.
He fired the consultants.
Instead, he replaced those morning meetings with daily logic puzzles, specifically complex Sudoku boards, and instituted strict objective accountability logs.
Replacing DEI with Sudoku. That is brilliant. What does that actually achieve psychologically?
Psychologically, it recenters the brain on objective problem solving rather than subjective emotional grievance. The rules of Sudoku are absolute.
If a mistake was made on the construction site, it wasn't analyzed for emotional intent. It was logged in the accountability ledger, owned by the person who made it, and corrected.
No emotional safe spaces, no analyzing lived experiences.
The result.
The company's profits jumped 67% in 2 years, and turnover plummeted. The men reported unprecedented job satisfaction because the rules of their environment were finally objective, clear, and fair.
It proves that male energy thrives under clear, logical parameters. And this reclamation is happening in education too.
Riker talks about the Silent Academy in Texas.
This is a private educational initiative teaching boys classical stoicism, classical rhetoric, and logic.
The key to the Silent Academy is the deliberate removal of the weaponized nursery dynamic. There are no safe spaces.
If a boy feels overwhelmed or frustrated by a complex problem, he is taught to use the trivium to reason his way through it.
He is taught emotional regulation through discipline, rather than being taught to cry for a specialized accommodation or a trauma counselor.
And what about the family structure? The family courts are stacked against men, so how do they build parallel structures there?
Look at the Fathers Guild in Ohio.
This is perhaps the most radical example in the book. 50 divorced fathers, many of whom had been financially decimated by the family court system, pooled their remaining resources.
They bought clustered homes in the same neighborhood and completely bypassed the traditional nuclear model.
They co-parent their children collectively, without any female partners involved in the households. The kids live with their dads in shifts, creating a tight-knit, highly disciplined tribal environment.
And the outcomes for the kids.
According to sociological data Riker cites from Ohio State, these children are scoring significantly above the national average in emotional regulation, academic performance, and psychological resilience.
Why? Because they are being raised in an environment governed by consistent, logical boundaries, and they are completely insulated from the emotional loyalty conflicts that often plague standard divorce situations.
Riker is synthesizing a vital point here, and it's one we need to make very clear as we analyze his work.
These men building these parallel structures, they are not operating out of a hatred for women. This isn't a misogynistic revenge fantasy.
Not at all. Riker explicitly states that these men are not anti-women. Rather, he describes them as the immune system of civilization.
They are actively rejecting ideological possession. They are refusing to apologize for their competence, their reliance on logic, or their innate masculinity.
By establishing parallel structures, whether in business, education, or alternative family models, they're demonstrating that male sovereignty is not a predatory force.
In fact, male sovereignty creates stability, prosperity, and a return to objective truth.
It's about drawing a hard line in the sand, reclaiming the trivium, reclaiming objective reality from the subjectivity trap.
Which brings us to the final synthesis of the book. Riker's ultimate warning is stark, and it's something everyone, regardless of your politics, needs to grapple with.
A civilization that replaces logic, objective truth, and merit with emotional totalitarianism and maternal narcissism simply cannot survive.
If tears become the highest law of the land, the physical, intellectual, and legal structures that built the modern world will inevitably collapse.
Men are actively encouraged by Riker to hold the line with truth, with clarity, and when necessary, with absolute silence in the face of emotional manipulation.
It is a profound, deeply unsettling, and highly detailed thesis. Riker maps out a society that has, in his view, completely inverted its core values, elevating subjective, fleeting feeling over observable, objective fact.
It forces us to examine the invisible water we're all swimming in. And while we, as your hosts, take no sides on the ultimate validity of his claims, the sheer volume of data, the historical parallels, and the sociological analysis he presents demands serious critical contemplation.
I completely agree. Our job was to lay out the map, and now it's up to you to navigate it. And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over, something that builds on Riker's work but takes it a step further into the future.
Think about this. If a society fully institutionalizes the idea that subjective emotional pain equals objective guilt, where simply feeling hurt is legally or culturally enough to convict someone of a crime, expel them from school, or fire them from a career.
What happens to the concept of genuine justice when the pendulum inevitably swings back?
What happens to a society when the mechanisms of empathy have been so thoroughly weaponized and abused by the unscrupulous that they lose all their credibility entirely?
When real victims actually cry for help a decade from now, will anyone be left who still believes them?
It's a chilling question. It speaks to the devastating long-term consequences of eroding objective truth. Once the fundamental trust in our institutions is broken by emotional manipulation and covert agendas, rebuilding that trust might be the hardest and most dangerous challenge of the next century.
It really makes you evaluate every interaction you have. And to explore these concepts in full, to see the citations and read the case studies for yourself, you need to read the source text.
Go to Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now to buy Crybully, The New Face of Female Aggression by Conrad Riker.
You also need to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack to keep up with his ongoing analysis of these institutional shifts.
Finally, if you got value out of today's deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.
Stay sharp, trust the facts, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.